Hey guys, Untitled TV bringing you another exclusive TradeSkillMaster 4 video teaching you the basics of this add-on so you can improve and ultimately make your share of gold in World of Warcraft. This video will be covering specifically groups and the fundamentals of creating those groups and understanding what's going on within this section of TradeSkillMaster 4. When you first open the add-on, you'll notice there's 6 core functionalities across the top. One of those specifically is groups. Clicking on groups initially, you'll come to this initial page with basically default information showing. Very minimal information. Don't get scared. We're going to walk through it. The good thing to know about groups is there's something called the default group, and this is very important to understand. If you remember in TradeSkillMaster version 3, there was a concept that was implemented within that add-on called Quick Post from Bags. And that functionality basically took anything not currently in a TSM group and allowed you to use the add-on to post effective items to the auction house with a decent price in turn to make gold and to sell that item. TradeSkillMaster version 4, the developers and the team wants to put this powerful add-on in the hands of beginners so that you can, from the beginning, from just the installation, looking at this base group with nothing here, use this add-on to functionally post items on the auction house and be a competitive person doing it with its built-in formulas. So basically everything that's currently in your bags, if you're currently using TradeSkillMaster version 4 fresh with no groups except this base group, you can go to the auction house and post items that are in your bag effectively. We'll be talking about the posting operations and additional features when you actually open up TradeSkillMaster version 4 at the auction house. But for now, we're talking about creating your groups within the UI. So when you first come in, you'll notice that the functionality is you can search for groups up at the top. Of course, we have nothing but the default base group, which currently contains all the information about your current items that are in your bag or in your inventory. Notice on the right-hand side, we have information about your groups, if you had any listed here. And then you also have a group operations section. We'll be covering details about the operations in a future video, specifically talking about the different types of operations. But because it's here in the group section and how you'll be linking them, we'll be covering this to some extent in this video as well. So let's first start about creating a group. You got to remember, like, groups are a structure or an organization of how you want to have your groups represented or your items in those groups represented in a view perspective. Meaning, do you want armor to be separated from weapons? Maybe you like transmog market like I do, and you'll have separate transmog items. Like in prior versions of TradeSkillMaster, you can also have subgroups of the main group. So let's start with a basic fundamental and say we want to create an armor group, a group that will contain all of our armor. To create a group, you want to basically highlight this base group, and there's a plus symbol here. When you click the plus, you'll notice that immediately a new group section appears below the base group that's automatically highlighted and brings you automatically to the section where you can apply group operations to that group. This is important because these operations, again, are the instructions or actions you want the group of items to be performed. What do you want these items in these groups to do when you go to the auction house? So first things first, let's name it. So it's going to be called new group. Up here you have a pencil symbol. That's new group. If you left click the pencil symbol, you'll notice that the new group becomes highlighted and allows you to type. So from here, we're going to type armor, and we're going to hit enter. Immediately notice that the representation on the left side is now changed to armor. Let's add a weapons group. We're going to go back up to the base group, and we're going to click the plus symbol. It's going to bring another subgroup underneath base called new group. Going back to the pencil on the right side, we're going to call this weapons. Hit enter, and there they are. So from this section, you want to make sure that these are main categories, if you want to call it. Refer to them as main categories. We have an armor group, and then we have a weapons group. And then, of course, you have your base group. So to get subgroups, now let's say we want, underneath armor, we want maybe, let's break them down by, we'll call it plate. Notice that when I left click on these groups, they highlight, and it gives me the ability with the same plus to click on that and then create a nested subgroup. So notice now, following the base group additions, it basically does the same thing. It's the same format. It brings me to the new group section. I click on the pencil, and now I can put plate. Notice now that we now have a main category or a main group, and then clicking this upside down triangle will collapse that and expand it. Notice here on the left, collapse and expand. And now we have a subgroup of that main group called plate. And you guessed it, if we wanted to add another cloth group, you always want to remember you're highlighting the section that you want to add to. Because if I were to add another group here, it would then place that subgroup underneath the plate group, which is a member of the armor group. If you look at this symbol right here, that's basically how it's tiered. You have a top level group, you have subgroups, and then you have subgroups, or child parent, if you want to call it that. So from here, we could definitely put, if we wanted to create this group, we could call this, if we wanted to break it down by, let's say, legioned. So now we have a plate group that's specifically to legioned, if you want to. Notice too that to delete groups, very simple. There's a trash can. Click delete, it gives you the confirmation. Click delete, and immediately it's gone. There's nothing that you can recover back unless you restore your groups, which will be done in another section. So the fundamentals of groups are all clicking the plus symbol, renaming it, and organizing your structure the way that you want, collapsing and recollapsing. The cool thing about this is now, before in TradeSkillMaster version 3, you had to do some manipulation in the management of groups and moving different groups and subgroups into different parent groups to be able to move stuff around. Now, if you hold your mouse button, left mouse button down, you can actually drag items or groups of items around to restructure the way you actually want your groups, which is pretty powerful. So you can actually change how you want to organize and remove or move your groups in this structure tree here. Very powerful. Again, you can do this up and down arrows showing you that you can drag wherever you want in the structure tree and do it accordingly. So if we were to add another group here, again, this is the subgroup level. We can call this test. And now we have a test, and now we have a plate. Same thing before. If we expand, these arrows always expand the group. I could move this entire group down into this structure. And that, remember, that will move all the items in that group accordingly with its operations. Very extremely powerful, very easy to use. I love the new user interface. Again, you want to remove things, just delete, and you can delete accordingly. If you want to add sections, always make sure if you're adding new top level categories, add it from the base group. If you're adding subcategories, just make sure you're clicking on the appropriate section, and you can go as deep as you want, depending on how you want to structure your information. At first, I would keep it basic, guys. Group management is important, but understanding the concepts of TradeSkillMaster 4 is very fundamental. Understand your structure first of how you want to organize your items, and then you can go as simple or as complex as you want. Me personally, I stick with very basic groups, and I do more with the operations than I do with the functionality or the organization of the items. Your preference, this tool gives you that capability to do it either way. So let's say now that we have a couple groups, let's add back in that weapon group. So I'm going to click on the base group, click the plus, click the pencil over here. I'm going to add back in weapons, hit enter, and now you notice I have a couple subcategories, armor and weapons. I want to add a subcategory like I've added underneath armor plate, but I'm going to call this two-handed. So now I'm going to click on the plus, come over here, 2H, two-handed. There we go. just to show you some structure of how you can do it around it. That's the core of groups. Very simple. So on the right hand side, you see two columns. You see add, remove. So once you have your base group set up on the left side, now we want to move items into those groups section and then grouped items. So here, just for the sake of simplicity, let's say you have a bunch of items that are in your bag that are ungrouped. Now remember, ungrouped items are still a part of the base group. But here, let's say we want specific items in our bags to move into certain groups so we can manage them and have different operations upon them. Let's take these boots, for instance. Left click on the boot, and you notice in the bottom you have the ability to add the item. Always make sure that you're left clicking on the group that you want to manage first. Otherwise, you'll be moving items into the wrong groups. So with armor selected, we want to move these feet over, highlight it, puts a check there for a visual, and then you go add items. Now notice it's actually associated with that group. And if I go to weapons, notice it's not there. If I go back to armor, notice it's there. Vice versa, if you want to remove items from your group, left click on the item. A visual indicator is the checkbox. Hit remove items in the bottom. And now it's moved back to the ungrouped section. One of the important features prior in TradeSkillMaster version 3 and so forth was this ability to ignore random enchants. What this does is, see where it says of the, when I check this box, it's going to be removing the of the enchants, like of the eagle, of the bear, and so forth. So this is pretty important because when you're, especially when you're doing operations and so forth, you're going to be posting at the fundamental item level, not the of the or the enchant level. That way you know that the item is going to be exactly where you want it to be posted on the auction house and not having to worry about other items above yours because of that enchant. So I highly recommend ignore random enchants is always on with your groups. As a beginner, there are some differences where you might want to have this off, but as a beginner, you want to make sure that this box is checked off here. If it's yellow, you're good. By default, it's not on. So again, group management, highlight the group, select the things that you want to add into that group, click add. You want to remove them, same process, remove. Now there is functionality, it might be hidden, but there is functionality now where if you want to highlight all of these items or deselect all of the items, especially if you're going to be dealing with lots of items in your inventory, you have the ellipses right here. Clicking on this will give you the ability, yes, select all and deselect all. Selecting all will check all of it. Click add. Vice versa over here. Ellipses, deselect all or select all. Remove. Moving them back and forth. Now let's say you wanted to select all, but now you want to remove lesser moonstone. Just click on it and you notice it will remove the checkbox. Oh, I did that by mistake. Click on it again. I wanted to remove tiger eye. Add the items. As you can see, moving items back and forth is very simple. It's just selecting the items you want or using these ellipses to be able to select all or deselect all, and then moving items in between the groups as you see fit. Very important. Now, a cool thing to do with this also is these filters at the very top. If you remember in TradeSkillMaster version 3, you had the ability to actually enter in parameters in here, if you will, or strings to be able to reduce what you're viewing to filter it, basically. So yeah, you can filter it on pattern if you wanted to as a keyword, but notice you can also filter it if you wanted to on certain features. So if I wanted to do specifically on armor, yeah, this still exists, armor. You can do that. So if I come here and I move this back out, notice because this is armor, I could actually do armor and then it would show up. I could actually do as well rare and then it would show up. So you could actually do /armor or /weapon. Uncommon if you wanted to. And that gives you the ability to do quick unfiltering and filtering so you can move large amounts of groups into and out of groups as you want to. So these concepts were way back into TSM version 3 with the parameters and the search strings. Right now, I'm only using it just for the fundamentals to be able to separate quick, to see where my armor is, where my weapons is, to be able to distinguish between uncommon, common, rare, epic. All those features work as you have different profiles. In fact, if I go back to my default profile, you notice now I have a lot more in here. Just to show you, I can actually do armor / uncommon, and here's all my uncommon armor. If I do /rare, notice it's only showing me the blues. So you could, like this, I have one here that hasn't been moved over, add that to that section, and now I've added it to the armor section. Same thing with weapons. Here's my weapons, / and then you can do uncommon, or rare, or epic, and right away you get some quick functionality. So don't be afraid to use these filter options the way they want. Obviously, it's based on the item or /armor or /weapon, and then you can do /rarity if you want to as well. Quickly move things in and out. So that's how you add and remove items. Now, if you click on group operations, this is the instructional part of the group of what you want to do with those items in your group. So for example, notice here that all of these, again, collapsible by that triangle, are the core operations that are associated with each group that you have the ability to update, override, and change. By default, just looking at auctioning, notice that there's a default operation assigned automatically of these operation types to your groups as you create them. Here's the default operation with a cogwheel here. Left click on the cogwheel and it's going to bring you to the operations section of that specific type, default. Like the default or the base group, all of your items automatically are in the base group and have default operations assigned to them. This is a default operation. On the left side are all the operations. On the right side is what those operations do by default. Notice too, if I delete it by accident, I have no default group now. If I click add, it's going to add in the default structure back with the associated functionality, and then you just need to rename it. Or whatever you want. Test. Renaming following the same structures we did in groups. So operations we're going to go into in further details in another video, but just showing you that the relationship here in the group operations of your groups do have a default operation enabled for each of them. With those default operations, there are actual formulas and specific criteria that make up those operations, which we'll get to in another video. Thank you guys for watching. That wraps up the group section. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know. Send any feedback, comments, suggestions, or any updates or future videos you want to see to wowprofitz@gmail.com. Thanks for watching and take care.